Americans now say you need $1.8 million to retire comfortably. That number came out of a Charles Schwab survey this year. And once it landed, the media did what the media always does with a round, intimidating number. It turned it into a headline. Suddenly, all over the internet, people were being told that comfortable retirement now costs $1.8 million, as if that number had been carved into stone by some committee of wise old men who had already solved the problem for everybody. I have never liked that kind of number. Not because it is impossible for somebody to need $1.8 million. Some people absolutely will. I dislike it because once a big scary number enters the public conversation, it becomes a narrative. And narratives have a way of overpowering arithmetic. People stop asking where the number came from. They stop asking what it assumes. They stop asking whether it has anything to do with their own life. They simply hear it often enough that it begins to feel like a law of nature. It is not. The amount you need to retire is not some universal figure floating above the country like a weather system. It is a direct function of how much you plan to spend, what income sources you will still have, how much risk you are willing to take, and how long you need the money to last. That is the whole game. So when I hear that Americans think they need $1.8 million, my question is not whether the number is scary enough. My first question is whether the number is actually useful, and in most cases, it is not. Let me tell you why. When it comes to retirement, the nest egg itself is only half the story. The other half is the spending. The nest egg is meant to support. If you never define the spending, the savings target becomes meaningless. You are aiming at a number without knowing the problem the number is supposed to solve. Fidelity, for example, has long suggested that people plan to spend about 80% of their working income in retirement. So if you make $100,000 a year while you are working, the simplified rule says you might plan for around $80,000 a year in retirement. For higher earners, Fidelity also points out that the spending target may be lower, closer to 55 to 60% of pre-retirement income. That alone should tell you something important. There is no single retirement number. There are only spending assumptions, and those assumptions can vary enormously. Now compare those survey headlines to what people actually have. As of 2 years ago, the median retirement account balance in the United States for people between 65 and 74 was around $200,000. For those 75 and older, it was closer to $130,000. Those figures are nowhere close to $1.8 million. And yet, according to the data cited in the source material, 82% of adults over age 60 reported doing at least okay financially. That gap matters because it tells you something is happening between the giant number in the headline and the real lives. People are actually living. Either millions of retirees are secretly in complete denial, or the $1.8 million headline is too blunt to describe the reality. I lean very heavily toward the second explanation. Retirement does not come down to one pile of money sitting by itself in a vault. Retirement is spending minus income sources. That is the equation. If you have Social Security, a pension, a side hustle, rental income, or any other source of cash flow, the amount your portfolio must produce goes down. If your spending is modest, the amount your portfolio must produce goes down. If your withdrawal strategy is too conservative, the amount you think you need goes up. If your withdrawal strategy is more realistic, the target may fall sharply. That brings me to the most famous retirement rule in America, the 4% rule. This is the rule almost everybody has heard of, whether they know where it came from or not. The classic version says that in the first year of retirement you can withdraw 4% of your portfolio, then adjust that dollar amount upward each year for inflation, and historically you would have had a very good chance of not running out of money over a 30-year retirement. That rule became the standard because people like standards. Standards are comforting, but standards also get turned into dogma long after the underlying assumptions deserve another look. What interests me is that the founder of the 4% rule himself eventually suggested the number could be higher. That should make people pause. William Bengen built his original work around a very specific retiree and a very specific stress test. Someone retiring into the ugly combination of poor market returns and nasty inflation in the late 1960s. It was intentionally conservative, and his original portfolio assumptions were simple, just intermediate-term U.S. Treasury bonds and large-cap U.S. stocks. Reasonable starting point. Not the final word on all investing for all time. As he expanded the portfolio design and looked at more diversified asset mixes, his own suggested withdrawal number moved up. He later indicated that something closer to 4.7% could still be quite conservative in the context of a more diversified portfolio. That is a meaningful shift, because once the withdrawal rate changes, the nest egg target changes fast. Let me show you how. Suppose you want to spend $40,000 a year in retirement from your portfolio. At a 4% withdrawal rate, you need $1 million. Simple enough. But change that withdrawal rate to 4.7%, and now the required nest egg falls to about $851,000. That is a difference of more than $149,000 from changing one assumption, not by earning more money, not by finding some magical stock. Simply by changing the withdrawal rate assumption from one conservative framework to another, still conservative but less restrictive one. Now, of course, there is real risk in withdrawing more every year. If you take out more, you increase the chance that you outlive your money, especially if markets disappoint. Inflation surprises, or your portfolio is not actually as diversified or robust as you imagine. So I am not telling anybody to throw caution aside and blindly adopt 4.7%. I am making a different point. The retirement target people think they need is often far more sensitive to assumptions than they realize. That means giant numbers and headlines should be treated as conversation starters, not commandments. Now let us do the reverse exercise. Suppose you really did hit $1.8 million. At a 4.7% withdrawal rate, that portfolio could support about $84,600 of annual spending. At 4%, it could support about $72,000. That is a very different level of retirement spending than what most Americans will likely need, especially once you account for the fact that many retirees spend less than they did during their working years. That is the part I think gets lost. The survey number sounds impressive because it is large, but if that large number implies retirement spending far above what many households actually require, then the number is describing a particular lifestyle, not retirement itself. And that is before you even bring Social Security into the picture. This is where the argument gets even more interesting. According to the Social Security Administration, the average retirement benefit in early 2024 was about $1,907 a month. The source material rounds that down to $1,800 to stay conservative, which gives you $21,600 a year. Now go back to the retiree who wants to spend $40,000 a year. If Social Security is already covering $21,600 of that, then the portfolio only needs to generate about $18,400 in the first year at a 4.7% withdrawal rate. That translates to about $412,000 of retirement savings needed. That is not a typo, not $1.8 million, about $412,000. Now yes, all the usual objections apply. Will Social Security still be there exactly as we expect? Will benefits change? Will inflation alter the real value? Will individual spending rise for health care or other reasons? Of course, those are fair questions, but I am not claiming every retiree can happily stroll into retirement with $412,000. I am showing you how dramatically the answer changes once you stop pretending the portfolio is the only source of retirement income. That is what debunks the giant headline number. The bigger issue is not whether $1.8 million is mathematically impossible. It is whether it is being presented as though everybody needs the same thing. They do not. Now, let me shift to early retirement for a moment, because this is where people get excited and then usually become either inspired or depressed depending on what their savings rate looks like. If you want to retire early, the rules get tougher because your money needs to last longer. That is obvious enough. The earlier you want out, the more capital you need, or the higher your savings rate needs to be, or both. This is where the source material uses a retirement calculator to show how dramatically savings rate changes the timeline. Suppose someone earns $75,000 a year and saves 70% of it. Starting from zero, they might be able to retire in roughly 7.1 years, drop the savings rate to 50%, and now you are out around 12.1 years. Drop it all the way to 20%. And the retirement timeline stretches to roughly 26.7 years. That is the real lesson. When people ask how to retire early, they often want a secret investment trick. The real answer is much more boring: savings rate. That is what moves the mountain. The same table shows that a 10% savings rate can push retirement out more than 5 decades. A 65% savings rate can cut it to under 10 years. That is why I have always believed people underestimate how much savings behavior matters and overestimate how much clever investing matters. Clever investing helps, but if the underlying savings rate is weak, you are trying to build a skyscraper on soft dirt. And this is why the average American finds retirement so hard. The source material cites the average U.S. savings rate around 4.5%. At that level, early retirement is extremely difficult. Even traditional retirement becomes harder than people realize. Not because the market is unfair, because the contribution rate is not doing enough work. This is why I have always preferred a simple rule. If you can get your savings rate to 15%, 20%, or higher, your future starts to change in a visible way. Below that, progress is slower than people expect. Let me give you another example from the source material. Suppose you earn $100,000 a year, save 40% of it, and already have $50,000 invested. Under a 4.7% withdrawal assumption, you might be able to retire in roughly 15.2 years. If you are 30, that puts retirement around 45. Now, I am not telling everyone to quit at 45. I am telling you the math is more sensitive to behavior than to headlines. The person who saves aggressively and keeps investing over time can get somewhere astonishingly fast compared to the person who spends first and hopes future raises will clean up the mess later. That is the hidden message behind all of this. Retirement is not mainly about hitting some media-approved big round number. Retirement is about designing a life whose cost structure and savings behavior make freedom mathematically possible. That is the deeper point. Now let me move to the practical part, because once you understand that $1.8 million is not a universal requirement, the next question becomes obvious. How do I actually build a plan? The source material offers 4 broad ideas, and I think they are worth preserving because they are the part most people skip while they are still busy being hypnotized by the headline number. First, define your retirement preferences and be willing to change them as your life changes. This sounds simple, but it is where most people fail because they want retirement to be a static fantasy. They say, I need this much. As if the number will never evolve. It will evolve. You need to decide whether your retirement life is built around $20,000 of annual spending or $40,000 or $60,000 or some looser, I want complete freedom version. And then you need to reevaluate that answer regularly because your income changes, your family changes, your priorities change, and your tolerance for risk changes. Static planning in a dynamic life usually produces bad decisions. Second, avoid the life decisions that sabotage compounding. This is where personal finance becomes less glamorous and more honest. Lifestyle creep is the enemy here. Not because pleasure is evil, because compounding is delicate in the beginning, and lifestyle inflation can kill it before it has a chance to become powerful. The fancy new car, the status purchase, the speculative get-rich-quick scheme, the giant jump in fixed costs, the habit of spending every raise as if the raise exists to upgrade the visible parts of your life instead of the invisible foundation underneath it. If you want early retirement or even just a strong retirement, those choices matter more than people admit. Third, plan as much as you can around the structure, not just the balance. If you retire early, remember that many retirement accounts are not freely accessible without penalties before age 59 and a half. So, if you want out at 40 or 45, you have to think about where the money comes from before the official retirement buckets unlock. This is also where relationships matter. A spouse changes the equation, children change the equation, family obligations change the equation. I always find it amusing when retirement math is treated like a one-person video game. It is not. Most adults do not live alone in a financial vacuum. There are partners, children, trade-offs, habits, and competing preferences. Any serious retirement plan has to acknowledge that. Finally, keep investment fees low, avoid market timing, and stay away from toxic debt. This is old wisdom because it keeps proving itself. Do not try to outsmart the market every week. Do not carry credit card debt while talking about retirement freedom. Do not pay managers and products more than you must. Do not let friction eat what compounding is trying to build. That part is boring. It is also true. And now we arrive at the real conclusion. The question is not whether $1.8 million is enough. The question is whether the number has anything to do with your retirement. For some people, it will be too low. For some people, it will be too high. For a lot of people, especially once Social Security enters the picture and spending is kept under control, it may be wildly higher than what is actually required. That is why I dislike retirement fear. Mongering it takes a planning problem and turns it into a theatrical one. The average American does not need more panic. They need a sharper equation. How much will I spend? What other income will I have? What withdrawal rate is reasonable for my situation? What savings rate can I actually sustain? What life decisions am I making that are helping or hurting compounding? Those are the questions that matter. Everything else is mostly noise. So if you want the plain version, here it is. You do not retire because you hit a big impressive number. You retire because you're spending your assets. Your withdrawal plan and your income sources line up in a way that makes work optional. That line might appear at $1.8 million. It might appear far below it. The trick is not to memorize the headline. The trick is to know your own math well enough that you stop needing the headline in the first place.